Queen Elizabeth says she wants Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, to be known as Queen Consort when Prince Charles becomes king. She made the announcement in a message marking the 70th anniversary of her reign, a milestone no British monarch has ever reached before. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports now from Sandringham.
The room changed the instant Princess Charlotte picked up the envelope. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody rushed across the table. Yet every palace official watching her seemed to realize the same thing at exactly the same moment. If that seal were broken, a question whispered behind palace walls for years might finally have an answer. The envelope carried Queen Elizabeth's personal crest, and according to long-standing palace rumors, it was connected to private reflections the late monarch intended only a trusted circle to understand. Some royal commentators have long speculated that among her final papers were notes about protecting the future of the monarchy after her reign. None of those claims have ever been publicly confirmed, but the speculation has never completely disappeared. What made this moment different was not the document itself. It was who had found it. Princess Charlotte had arrived expecting another lesson about royal history. Instead, she had unknowingly stepped into the middle of a mystery that seemed to make even the most experienced palace officials uncomfortable.
Now, Buckingham Palace says the Koh-i-Noor diamond will not be used in the coronation. Instead, Camilla, the Queen Consort, will be crowned with Queen Mary's crown, which has been taken out of the Tower of London to be resized for the May 6th coronation. Our news correspondent Charlotte Gallagher is here with us. And Charlotte, every time anyone mentions the Koh-i-Noor, it's sort of almost shrouded in controversy, isn't it?
One glance toward the faded handwriting was enough to stop the lesson completely. Suddenly, nobody wanted to explain what she was looking at. What could possibly be written inside a forgotten royal paper that would make seasoned palace staff exchange nervous looks? And why, if the rumors were true, did so many people believe its contents had something to do with Queen Camilla's future place in the monarchy? Hi viewers, if you found a private letter that could change how your own family saw its future, would you read it, or would you leave it sealed forever? Tell me your answer in the comments, because I really want to know what you would do. For generations, Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle have safeguarded countless private letters, diaries, and official papers. Most never become public. Some remain sealed for decades. A few develop almost legendary status among historians because no one outside a very small circle knows exactly what they contain, and according to persistent royal speculation, one particular file has inspired more whispered conversations than almost any other. Tonight, the story begins the moment Princess Charlotte reached for it. The white gloves froze halfway through the motion. Princess Charlotte had reached for a cream-colored envelope resting beneath a stack of carefully preserved royal papers inside Windsor Castle's secure archive room. The elderly archivist's expression changed instantly. His hand moved first. His voice followed a heartbeat later. "That file is not part of today's lesson." Charlotte stopped, but her eyes remained fixed on the faded royal seal pressed into the wax. Across the front, written in unmistakably elegant handwriting, were words that seemed ordinary until the room suddenly fell silent. No explanation followed. No one rushed to fill the silence. Outside, tourists wandered the castle grounds without the slightest idea that inside one quiet room, a forgotten document had interrupted an ordinary afternoon. What began as a simple history lesson had unexpectedly become something no one appeared prepared to discuss. If that envelope truly contained Queen Elizabeth's final private reflections, why had it remained hidden for so long? And why did everyone in the room suddenly behave as though one young princess had accidentally stepped into a conversation that belonged to another generation? Hi viewers, if you discovered a sealed letter written by someone in your family who is no longer alive, would you open it immediately, or would you leave it untouched? Tell everyone your answer in the comments, because every choice says something about the kind of person you are. The answer mattered more than it first appeared. For decades, Queen Elizabeth had built a reputation for saying little while observing everything. She rarely rushed important decisions. She almost never left emotional reactions on paper. Every note she approved, every speech she delivered, every private audience she held reflected careful thought rather than impulse. That is why palace staff treated even the smallest handwritten page with extraordinary respect. According to long-standing royal tradition, certain private correspondence is preserved rather than immediately released. especially when it contains personal reflections instead of constitutional instructions.
And some people even say there's a curse. There's the curse of the Koh-i-Noor diamond. I mean, it is one of the world's largest cut diamonds. It's stunning. It's 105 carats. It weighs 20 grams. It's enormous when you look at it. But the thing is, it's so controversial. It was taken from India and given to Queen Victoria in Victorian times.
Historians have often noted that monarchs sometimes record observations intended for future generations without expecting those notes to become public. Whether any particular sealed document exists, or what it contains, is ultimately a matter of speculation unless officially confirmed. Yet speculation has always surrounded the monarchy. Inside palaces, unanswered questions often survive longer than answers themselves. Charlotte had grown up surrounded by portraits, ceremonies, uniforms, traditions, and centuries of carefully protected history. She understood that every room carried stories, every corridor had witnessed decisions that shaped generations. But no lesson had prepared her for the strange reaction she had just witnessed from experienced palace staff. Nobody looked angry. Nobody appeared frightened. Instead, they looked concerned. Concern has a way of spreading, without a single word being spoken. The archivist carefully lifted the envelope from the table, before placing it inside another protective folder. His movements were calm, almost rehearsed, but they carried unmistakable urgency. Another official quietly closed a leather register while exchanging a brief glance with a senior private secretary standing near the doorway. Charlotte noticed every detail. Children often notice what adults overlook. She watched the secretary politely excuse himself before leaving the archive room without explanation. No announcement was made, no discussion followed. Still, the atmosphere had completely changed. Only minutes earlier, everyone had been discussing the history of royal seals.
And it's not just India that wants it back. There's other countries that claim ownership of it. So Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan. In fact, the Taliban have asked for it back. So before the coronation, there was lots of speculation. Would Camilla, the Queen Consort, have it as part of her crown? Because the Queen Mother, the last Queen Consort, did when she had her coronation in the 1930s, and she wore it again when her daughter had her coronation in the 1950s.
Now no one seemed interested in history anymore. They were thinking about the future. Far beyond the castle walls, newspapers continued debating the modern monarchy. Television commentators discussed public appearances, official engagements, constitutional traditions, and changing public opinion. Every royal family member occupied a different place in those conversations. King Charles carried the enormous responsibility of continuing a reign unlike any before it. Queen Camilla remained one of the most discussed members of the royal family, her public role continuing to attract both support and criticism from different observers. The Prince and Princess of Wales represented continuity for many people looking toward the future. And Princess Charlotte, still young enough to experience royal life through curiosity rather than responsibility, had unexpectedly found herself standing at the center of something no commentator had anticipated. What exactly had she almost uncovered? The answer did not appear inside newspapers. It did not arrive through palace announcements. It remained locked inside a room built to protect history from becoming tomorrow's headlines. Meanwhile, the senior private secretary walked briskly through Windsor's stone corridors toward another office, where several trusted household officials were already gathered. None of them raised their voices. Palace business rarely required shouting. Quiet conversations often carried the greatest consequences. One name surfaced almost immediately: William. Not because anyone believed he already knew every detail, but because questions involving preserved papers connected to Queen Elizabeth naturally concerned the future king more than almost anyone else. No emergency had been declared, no crisis officially existed, yet one forgotten envelope had quietly become the subject of private discussion among people whose careers depended upon protecting royal continuity. Charlotte remained unaware of those conversations. She simply wondered why history had suddenly become off-limits. That innocent question lingered long after the archive lesson ended. During the drive back through the castle grounds, she looked once more toward the centuries-old towers rising above Windsor. The building appeared exactly as it always had: strong, peaceful, unchanged.
Massive diamonds from Queen Elizabeth's personal collection will be put into this crown for her. So the Koh-i-Noor diamond will have no part in the coronation.
And given the part it's had in previous coronations, I mean, it says so much about the changing time and attitudes, really.
Appearances, however, rarely reveal everything. Some of the most important chapters in royal history were never announced with crowds or ceremonies. They began with one conversation behind closed doors, one overlooked page, one unexpected discovery that slowly changed how those closest to the crown understood the weight of duty. If the envelope truly contained Queen Elizabeth's final private reflections, then its greatest significance might not rest in what it said. It might rest in why someone believed it should remain unseen. And somewhere inside Windsor Castle, as another secure cabinet quietly clicked shut, one senior official spoke a sentence barely above a whisper. "Before anyone reads another page, His Royal Highness should be informed." The room fell silent once again, because everyone understood that once Prince William opened that file, there would be no returning it to history untouched. The door to the private study locked from the inside with a dry, heavy metallic click. Prince William did not take a seat. He remained standing by the high mahogany table, his eyes fixed on the thick cream folder that had just been transported under escort from the Windsor archives. Across from him, King Charles adjusted his spectacles with hands that betrayed a subtle tremor, while two senior constitutional advisors stood motionless near the curtained windows. The atmosphere in the room felt strained, thick with a quiet panic that no one dared speak aloud. On top of the desk rested the unopened folder, its red sealing wax intact, carrying the distinct personal cipher of the late Queen Elizabeth II. "Are we entirely certain no one else has handled this since it left the cabinet?" William asked, his voice low and sharp. The senior private secretary inclined his head instantly. "The file was secured the second the princess stepped away, Your Royal Highness. No copies were made. No transcriptions exist." King Charles reached out, his fingers hovering over the edge of the paper. For months, the public had believed that every private memorandum left behind by the late monarch had been categorized, catalogued, and safely locked away for future historians. News outlets regularly speculated about her final months, producing endless documentaries about her legacy and her quiet guidance during her transition of power. Yet here, sitting beneath the soft lamplight of a private study, was absolute proof that the public narrative was incomplete. Queen Elizabeth had left one final instruction behind, and its timing suggested she had deliberately waited until the final chapter of her life to write it. The secretary produced a brass letter opener, carefully slicing through the centuries-old wax seal. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the silent room like a sudden fracture. Inside lay 4 pages of heavy bond paper, covered in the tight, slanted handwriting that had governed the British monarchy for more than 7 decades. These were not formal legal decrees drawn up by parliamentary lawyers. They were raw, meticulous, handwritten observations written by a sovereign who understood the fragile nature of public trust better than anyone in modern history. As the king began to read the opening lines silently, the color visibly drained from his face. The notes did not call for constitutional upheaval. They did not attempt to alter the line of succession or strip away royal titles. Instead, they focused with surgical precision on a far more delicate issue: the precise boundaries surrounding Queen Camilla's long-term role within the institution. For years, commentators and media analysts had debated how the late Queen truly viewed Camilla's ultimate position. Official statements had always emphasized unity and support, encouraging the public to embrace Camilla when the time came for Charles to take the throne. But the private memorandum revealed a far more complex reality. Elizabeth had not written these pages out of anger or personal resentment. She had written them out of an unyielding, almost ruthless dedication to the preservation of the crown itself. In the handwritten text, the late monarch carefully outlined the distinction between 3 concepts that most casual observers frequently confused: personal honor, public influence, and constitutional authority. She wrote that while a queen consort must be afforded every degree of personal respect and dignity, her formal influence over the future direction of the monarchy must remain strictly limited, ensuring that the primary focus of the institution always remains fixed on the direct line of succession. Every line read like a masterclass in institutional survival. Elizabeth foresaw the precise public debates that would arise years after her passing. She understood that modern audiences would constantly scrutinize every gesture, every public speech, and every official decision made by senior family members. To protect the crown from public cynicism, she argued, the monarchy had to demonstrate that no personal affection could ever override the structural stability of the throne. William stepped closer to the desk, reading over his father's shoulder. His expression remained unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders was obvious. For William, this was not merely a historical document. It was a direct directive from his grandmother regarding how he, his wife Catherine, and his children must navigate the future. Hi viewers, if you are the kind of person who turns a blind eye to the truth just because it makes you uncomfortable, then maybe this channel isn't for you. But if you actually care about honesty, respect the real history behind the crown, and believe that loyalty matters, prove it right now by subscribing and hitting that like button. Leaving without subscribing tells us everything we need to know about where your values lie. The memorandum laid out clear, uncompromising parameters. Queen Elizabeth explicitly noted that while Camilla's dedication to duty was beyond question, the long-term authority of the crown rested solely in the hands of those born into the bloodline and their immediate heirs. She cautioned against allowing modern public relations strategies to blur the lines between temporary constitutional roles and the permanent continuity of the royal house. To those standing in the study, the message was unmistakable. The late Queen was issuing a silent warning from beyond the grave, reminding her successors that the public's acceptance of the royal family depended entirely on absolute transparency regarding who holds true constitutional authority. Yet as the advisors carefully turned to the third page of the document, the secretary suddenly paused. A thick crease ran horizontally across the center of the sheet. Someone had deliberately folded the lower half of the page over itself and secured it with a secondary strip of clear adhesive tape, complete with a tiny handwritten note in the margin. To be unsealed only when necessary. The room grew completely motionless. The private secretary looked up, his eyes meeting the king's. Unsealing that folded section meant crossing a line from historical review into active decision-making. It meant revealing whatever final, unfiltered thought Elizabeth had chosen to hide, even from her closest aides during her lifetime. William looked down at the small, elegant handwriting framing the folded paper. He realized that during her brief moment in the Windsor archives, Charlotte had not just stumbled upon a forgotten file. She had uncovered the one piece of guidance her great-grandmother had intentionally placed just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to test the resolve of those left behind. "Do we open it?" the secretary asked quietly, his hand hovering over the tape. Neither the king nor the prince answered immediately. They both knew that once that adhesive was peeled away, the carefully constructed narratives of the past few years would be challenged forever. Whatever was written beneath that fold had the power to redefine how the royal household operated for generations to come. Outside the study, the quiet routine of the palace continued uninterrupted. Footmen walked the corridors, security teams monitored the gates, and press officers prepared routine media updates for the evening news. But inside that single, locked room, the future of the British monarchy hung on a single decision, waiting to see if those in power possessed the courage to face the late Queen's final, hidden truth. A heavy crystal water glass shattered across the parquet floor, sending sharp fragments scattering into the shadows of the private drawing room. Nobody moved to clean it up. King Charles stood near the fireplace, his face flushed with a mixture of grief and sudden defensiveness. Across the room, Prince William stood like stone, his arms crossed tightly, his gaze fixed on the broken glass before shifting back to his father. The air in Highgrove had turned suffocating, thick with an agonizing conflict that had been building since the folded memorandum was brought out of Windsor Castle. She was protecting the family, Charles. She was not attacking anyone, Princess Catherine said softly from the corner armchair, her voice remarkably steady amid the rising temperature in the room. "It will be read as a vote of no confidence," Charles insisted, his voice raspy with emotion as he turned away from the hearth. "If this reaches the public domain, every single thing Camilla has built over 25 years will be dismantled by commentators in 24 hours. People will claim my mother never truly accepted her. That was the core of the agony fracturing the inner circle." For King Charles, protecting Camilla was not merely a matter of household management. It was the central campaign of his adult life. He had spent decades weathering public hostility, tabloid abuse, and relentless institutional pushback to ensure the woman he loved was given the dignity of a queen. To discover that his mother had left behind a private document, drawing strict, unyielding boundaries around Camilla's long-term authority, felt like a devastating personal betrayal. Yet for Prince William, the document represented something entirely different. It was the ultimate proof of Queen Elizabeth's legendary pragmatism. The late Queen had lived through the abdication crisis, the catastrophic fallout of the 90s, and the constant threat of public disillusionment. She knew that personal devotions pass away, but the crown must endure forever. "This is not about your feelings, Father," William said, his tone cold, precise, and entirely devoid of sentimentality. "It is about what happens when you and I are no longer here." Grandmother knew that if the lines between personal preference and constitutional duty get blurred, the entire structure collapses under the next generation. The debate raged on for hours behind closed doors while household officials waited nervously in the adjoining hallway. The division was absolute. Senior advisors who had served under the late Queen argued fiercely that the document should be returned to the deepest vault in the royal archives and sealed for 100 years. They warned that releasing such guidance would spark an unforgivable media storm, turning brother against brother and tearing apart the fragile unity of the working royals. On the other side, younger legal secretaries and constitutional historians insisted that hiding the memorandum was far more dangerous. In the modern era of leaks, digital records, and investigative journalism, a buried secret is a ticking time bomb. If the press discovered that the royal household had deliberately concealed Queen Elizabeth's final observations about the monarchy's future, the accusation of a palace cover-up would do tenfold more damage than the text itself. If you are going to scroll away right now, ask yourself why you are choosing to ignore the truth. Most people lack the courage to face hard historical facts, preferring comfortable lies instead. If you truly respect real monarchy history and have the strength to look beyond manufactured public relations, you will subscribe and like this video immediately. Leaving now only proves that you prefer to live in ignorance, while others seek the truth. As the arguments echoed off the historic walls, the deep psychological weight of Queen Elizabeth's presence seemed to fill the room. Throughout her 70-year reign, she had mastered the art of extreme compartmentalization. She loved her son deeply, yet she never allowed maternal affection to interfere with her sacred oath to the nation. She had welcomed Camilla into the family, praised her hard work, and granted her public honors. But when she sat alone at her desk in her final months, she stripped away all personal sentiment. She wrote with the icy clarity of a sovereign who understood that the survival of the institution depended on absolute boundaries. Did the late Queen distrust Camilla's ultimate intentions? Or was she desperately trying to safeguard Catherine and young Charlotte from inheriting an administrative structure crippled by competing centers of power? The questions hung in the air like poison. Rumors and whispers had circulated for years among court commentators, claiming that behind the polite smiles at Royal Ascot and Trooping the Colour, a subtle power struggle was constantly taking place over access, patronage, and future influence. Some insiders insisted that Camilla's allies within the household had been quietly expanding her office's authority, while others claimed Catherine was determined to secure her children's precedence at all costs. In the middle of this emotional battlefield sat Princess Charlotte, whose innocent curiosity in the Windsor archives had accidentally set this entire crisis in motion. She was only a child, yet her simple act of pointing at a forgotten folder had exposed the deep fault lines buried beneath the royal family's polished image. Late into the evening, as a heavy silence finally fell over Highgrove, William picked up the high-resolution photograph of the memorandum that the secretary had brought for review. He leaned under the desk lamp, scrutinizing every stroke of his grandmother's fountain pen. His eyes moved past the main paragraph, past the heavy red wax mark, down to the extreme bottom right margin of the folded page. His breath caught in his throat. There, squeezed into the tiny white space at the bottom of the paper, was a minuscule line of handwriting that every legal expert, archivist, and senior advisor in the room had completely overlooked in their rush to debate the main text. William's fingers tightened against the edge of the paper as he read the tiny letters. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. The adults had been fighting over titles, pride, and public relations for 12 hours, entirely blind to the fact that Queen Elizabeth had left a second, hidden clue right in plain sight. A microblade sliced through the aging adhesive tape with a sharp, sickening whisper. The paper unfolded slowly, peeling back decades of carefully kept silence inside the secure meeting room. Prince William held his breath, leaning over the table beside his father, while the senior archivist used gloved fingertips to flatten the crisp margin note that Princess Charlotte had noticed. The room fell into absolute silence. The bitter arguments, the quiet anxieties about public relations, and the defensive pride that had gripped the family for hours vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, suffocating suspense. William read the tiny handwritten words out loud, his voice cutting through the heavy air. The survival of the sovereign house requires that each generation receive unambiguous constitutional boundaries, never dynamic personal loyalties. King Charles stared at the ink. The heavy tension in his expression slowly softened into shock. For weeks, court rumors and speculative commentary had suggested that Queen Elizabeth had spent her final months quietly worrying about Camilla, or perhaps attempting to restrict her standing out of lingering loyalty to older traditions. Sensational reports had claimed that secret papers contained harsh demands intended to diminish the Queen Consort's position after Charles took the throne. Yet the reality sitting under the lamplight was infinitely more profound and vastly more powerful than any sensational headline. Queen Elizabeth had not written this document to target Camilla. She had not written it to strike out at her son's happiness, nor to ignite a posthumous war over titles. The late Queen was issuing a timeless warning about the nature of power itself. She realized that whenever a monarchy relies on personal popularity or individual relationships to maintain its authority, it becomes fragile, vulnerable to the shifting winds of public mood. By defining strict, unyielding boundaries for Queen Camilla's institutional role, Elizabeth was actually protecting her. She was removing any ambiguity that could lead to future conflict, ensuring that no critic could ever accuse Camilla of overstepping her constitutional mandate. She was shielding the entire family, especially Catherine and young Charlotte, from being dragged into future disputes over who truly directed household policy. The realization settled over the room like a physical weight. The secret was never about revenge. It was never about personal dislike or court intrigue. It was a masterclass in institutional survival, from a monarch who had weathered 70 years of global change by placing the crown far above human emotions. King Charles leaned back in his chair, taking a slow, shaky breath. The anger that had consumed him during the early hours of the debate completely evaporated, replaced by a deep, emotional understanding of his mother's lifelong sacrifice. Camilla quietly reached out, placing a hand over his, her expression filled with a quiet, dignified acceptance. She understood that Elizabeth's instructions were not an insult, but a shield, designed to keep the peace long after everyone in that room was gone. William looked down at the paper, feeling a sudden, intense pride for his grandmother's foresight, along with a quiet awe at his daughter's sharp eyes. Young Charlotte had not caused a crisis by uncovering the file. She had delivered the very clarity her family desperately needed to move forward together, without lingering doubts or secret anxieties. If you are going to walk away now, after learning the true weight of royal duty, you are simply proving that you never cared about real history in the first place. Most people prefer cheap scandal over shocking truth, because scandal requires no thinking. If you have the integrity to honor real sacrifice and want to stand with those who seek authentic answers, subscribe to this channel right now and like this video. Closing this tab without subscribing shows that you would rather consume false rumors than support real discovery. With the core text finally unsealed and fully understood, the advisors began organizing the official record. They realized that the document did not need to be hidden away in panic, nor did it need to be leaked to fuel public media storms. It belonged where it had always been, inside the royal archives, preserved as a master guidance note for future sovereigns preparing to take the oath of duty. Yet, as the archivist gathered the documents to place them back into the protective folder, he paused at the final page, sitting in the bottom of the leather casing. It was a single sheet that had remained completely untouched throughout the long night of intense debate. Unlike the previous pages, which contained formal constitutional observations and tight legal notes, this page was written in a softer, looser hand, carrying a personal warmth that made the archivist's fingers freeze. One final page remained unread. William noticed the sudden pause and reached down, gently lifting the sheet into the light. He expected another layer of administrative guidance, another sharp lesson in constitutional history. Instead, as his eyes scanned the opening lines, a fresh wave of psychological tension filled the room, pointing toward a deeply personal, hidden farewell that Queen Elizabeth had left behind for the children who would carry her legacy into the distant future. A single tear traced down the crease of King Charles's cheek, glistening under the soft glow of the desk lamp. Prince William read the final page aloud, his voice dropping an octave as the intimate words echoed through the silent study. The sheet contained no administrative directives or legal theories. It was an intensely personal letter, penned by Queen Elizabeth during her quiet moments at Balmoral shortly before her passing. She wrote directly to the future generations of her family, describing the immense burden of wearing a crown that belongs to the nation rather than the individual. She spoke of quiet sacrifices, the bitter solitude of public life, and the absolute necessity of personal integrity. She addressed the young ones explicitly, noting that the true strength of the monarchy would not rest in ancient titles or grand ceremonies, but in the quiet character, personal discipline, and unwavering unity of those who come next. Standing quietly near the doorway, Princess Catherine pressed her hands together, visibly moved by the profound tenderness of the message. The late Queen had foreseen every storm, every public debate, and every internal friction that would challenge her family after her death. She had left behind not a curse or a secret weapon, but a compass, designed to guide her descendants through the unpredictable waters of the modern world. In that quiet moment, Princess Charlotte ceased to be merely a child who had stumbles upon an old folder. She became the symbolic bridge between the past and the future. By uncovering the sealed file during her history lesson, she had accidentally unlocked her great-grandmother's ultimate legacy, ensuring that the entire household remembered the true purpose of their life of service. The long night of suspicion, fear, and defensive conflict melted away into absolute quiet. King Charles sat back, his face serene, finally at peace with the memory of his mother's wisdom. Queen Camilla offered a gentle, knowing smile, understanding that her place in history was fully secure, protected by the very boundaries the late Queen had so carefully constructed. William looked at his father, a tacit agreement passing between them. The document would not be destroyed, nor would it be used as a weapon in public relations battles. It would be restored to the archive, preserved as an everlasting guide for the sovereigns yet to come. If you are prepared to turn away now and forget everything you just heard, then you are admitting that real truth means nothing to you. Most viewers flit from one scandal to another without ever understanding the profound sacrifice required to run a nation. If you are one of the few who value authentic history, dedication, and undiluted honesty, you need to subscribe to this channel right now, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Ignoring this final call proves you would rather stay blind to the truth while real historical revelations pass you by. The heavy brass doors of the Windsor archive room opened with a soft, steady creak as the morning light began to spill across the stone courtyard. The archivist carefully lifted the cream envelope, placing it back into the velvet-lined steel box inside the secure vault. The lock clicked shut with a sharp, definitive snap, sealing the memorandum back into the quiet custody of history. The crisis was over, the fears were quieted, and the royal family stood united, grounded by a newfound understanding of their shared duty. Princess Charlotte walked out onto the manicured grass of the castle grounds, the crisp morning air catching her coat. She looked up at the ancient round tower rising high above the fortress. She did not fully comprehend every legal detail buried in the pages she had found, but she understood the weight of the heritage resting on her shoulders. She carried something far more valuable than a discovery. She carried the unshakable truth that the crown survives only when duty stands far above every personal desire. The greatest secret Queen Elizabeth left behind was never about a title. It was about ensuring that every generation, beginning with Charlotte's, would remember that the crown survives only when duty stands above every personal relationship. Yet as the heavy vault door locked shut, the archivist noticed something else hiding at the very back of that same metal safe. Resting beneath Queen Elizabeth's folder was an uncatalogued red leather journal stamped with King George VI's personal seal, containing a handwritten entry dated August 1936 that mentions an unsanctioned royal birth kept secret from the public for nearly a century. Next time, we pull back the curtain on the royal family's most dangerous biological secret, a hidden heir whose existence could shatter the line of succession forever, and you cannot afford to miss a single second of what comes next.